Okay, so here we are, following a columnist, semester 2. And again, if we just take a quick look at the assignment, so we are going to be following one columnist this semester from that big list that you've already been given, and we have the different tasks. Task 1, the brief biography, and then Task 2, the 4 annotated columns. So as we actually look at a column today, we're going to keep in mind all of these different things that are here in Task 2. We want to identify the central claim, rhetorical devices using our gold pack, along with the different appeals that we might see, the tone, errors of logic from our green sheet. We also want to see the way an author uses sources, whether they're using data, anecdotes, interviews, or history. And we also want to try to identify audience, along with author's purpose. And our first one is due February 1st. So assuming that we have decided upon a columnist, we're going to use the column that I gave to you a few days ago. And looking at that one, Who's Standing in the Way of Change? You Are, by Michael Kinsley. And this comes to us November 22nd, 2012. What I'm going to do here is going to model different ways in which we might look for all those other things. Okay? And same way that we've done in class. So I'm going to start with the very first paragraph. I'm going to read it aloud and then try to figure out what's going on with it. Bill Clinton became U.S. president on a platform of change. Not change in any particular way, just change in the abstract. So initially I'm going to see, and of course I have my highlighters in hand because I love to highlight, Bill Clinton. All right, a reference to Bill Clinton. So of course I'm going to think, okay, that's an allusion. That's an appeal, perhaps to history or to politics. Many people really love Bill Clinton and consider him on the Democratic side to have been a great president. In fact, he's a little bit of a folk hero to some of those folks. So starting with him appeals to that history and also ties into that appeal to Bill Clinton's credibility. For many, the 90s were good. Money was made. Internet became popular, etc., etc. What else is going on here? Okay, this entire paragraph as a hook is an anecdote. So if I'm thinking about evidence and how this author is using and developing evidence, all right, well, there's one thing that he uses. He uses the anecdotal evidence of Bill Clinton. What else is going on here? Bill Clinton became U.S. president on a platform of change. Not change in any particular way, just change in the abstract. Okay, so of course, I like to look at the syntax and go, hey, dash. So there's something important here. Around the dashes, I have the word change a couple of different times. So I have some repetition. And if I think about the effect of this repetition, I might say, okay, change, change, change. Well, the more we use a word, and plus that first change is in quotes, which means change didn't really happen, and the more times I use a word, the less impact it might have, giving me that example of repetition. All right, I feel I've got paragraph 1 pretty well identified, so I'm going to head on to paragraph 2. Like characters in the Chekhov play, Americans found daily life unbearable in some usually unspecified way and dreamed of escape. But they didn't have the energy to achieve escape velocity. Then along came this fast-talking charmer, and suddenly we've left Chekhov behind and are in The Music Man. All right, well, I'm a high school student. I don't know who the heck some of these people are, but Chekhov, Music Man. All right, I've got a bunch of allusions going on here. So perhaps I have to think, why? Who would know who these folks are? Who would know Chekhov? Who would know The Music Man? Well, I've got a context clue here telling me that in The Music Man, there is a fast-talking charmer. Okay? A fast-talking charmer. When I think fast-talking charmer, I might think someone who is, to use your guys' language, and not all of you, of course, because this is a stupid word, a player, play on. Okay? So I think about that. And then check off those illusions in the Music Man, musicals. Who goes to musicals? So this might give me an opportunity to think about audience. So who goes to musicals? All right, folks that have money, folks who like culture, whatever that might mean. We could put culture in quotes. People who probably more on the liberal side, the Democratic side, and that's just kind of one of those stereotypes, because I think about different folks who might attend the theater. And there are Republicans who, of course, attend the theater, but it appears, by talking about Chekhov, who was a Russian writer and revolutionary, or had revolutionary thought, along with the Music Man, I can draw that conclusion fairly quickly. And then, of course, I get the classic like. So, of course, I know that's a simile. And you go, but Mr. Couch, that's so simple. I've been doing similes since like 4th grade. Well, yeah. So we are comparing the characters in a Chekhov play to Americans who found daily life unbearable in some usually unspecified way. Hey, alliteration. All right. I think I just spelt that incorrectly, but so be it. Alliteration. So unbearable in some usually unspecified way. Unspecified way, and dreamed of escape. A way that is not known. So we don't know, according to this author here, saying that we don't know why our daily life is unbearable, but we didn't have the energy to achieve escape velocity, saying that we are lazy. Okay, that's an interesting analogy there. All right, so again, I've got all of that. Okay, so he's appealed to his audience. He's used a number of different devices. In fact, there's a lot going on in paragraph 2 for me to take note of. All of that really establishing this audience has got to be pretty intelligent in order to get all of that and to dissect all of this. And if I pause for a moment and think, well, when I initially read this, I thought, oh, okay, this guy's got a pretty decent argument. She's talking about change. We all like change. Okay? And now as I start to look at it, I go, ooh, he's doing a little bit more than that. A little bit more. So then on to paragraph 3. Modifying Clinton's formula only slightly, Barack Obama's campaign mantra in 2008 was, change you can believe in. This year, a major part of Republican nominee Mitt Romney's challenge to President Obama was throwing this formula back in his face. Where was the change Obama had talked about? And of course, you know my disdain for rhetorical questions. And that disdain comes from the fact that when we use rhetorical questions, the other side, those who might disagree, become offended. However, since our audience is already rich, culture, liberal, democratic, there's no one to offend here. Those folks who agree are just kind of nodding their heads going along with it. I do want to move on. This strategy failed, but not because the voters decided that, on reflection, maybe they didn't want change. It was because Romney is unconvincing in the role of change agent. He has it pretty good. Why would he want things to change? All right, another rhetorical question. So that's 2 of those that our author has used. Apparently, we think about that toolbox. Our author likes that. And then we have this, it was because Romney is unconvincing in the role of change agent. Okay? I have to go to my logical fallacies and think, unconvincing, and he has it pretty good, might fall under that category of a hasty generalization, because at least he doesn't have it good in the sense that he lost the election. That might be a little bit of a bummer. But then this comparison. So we have this comparison, this metaphor, Romney and change agents. And this is kind of sneaky, because when I think change agent, that's an interesting phrase. Change agent. change agent. Well, that's not how I normally see this phrase. I think of agent of change, or at least that's the more common usage. So why does our author use change agent? What else might go in front of agent? Secret agent. Secret agent. And then it's very subtle that our author is actually, the logical fallacy he is making is an attack on Mitt Romney in the form of an ad hominem. A sneaky ad hominem at that. Okay, because he has it pretty good. Why would he want things to change? And we would have to qualify all of those statements. Define good. We're talking just financial good, emotional good, video game good, Pokemon good. I don't know. We could ask any of those questions. So again, appealing to our audience, we can definitely infer that our audience is primarily Democratic, okay, and already leaning towards what our author is saying. And our author really backs that up in our next paragraph. Americans certainly have change in our blood. Our semi-official national myth, celebrated this week on Thanksgiving, is of ancestors who uprooted themselves and crossed the ocean to start a new life. Americans with this basic story in their past are still a majority of the citizenry, though just barely. Americans certainly have change in our blood. Yeah, America, America, yeah, you tell it. Okay, so we start out with that appeal to patriotism. Okay, so we have change in our blood. Yeah, America. And then he immediately follows up with our semi-official national myth. Well, myth is something that may or may not be true. So when we start to think about Thanksgiving, we might then think, what exactly is our author talking about? My apologies for that pause there. A student just came in to bother me. You can probably guess which one. So, national myth. When we think Thanksgiving, we think, oh yeah, a bunch of dudes dressed in black and white, Thanksgiving, turkey, Indians. Okay? But there's a lot more truth to that, and that's a far bigger discussion about what actually happened in New England around that time period. And so we'll simply leave the idea that a lot of things in our history textbooks, a lot of things become part of that national myth. Okay, things that may or may not be true. Celebrated this week on Thanksgiving is of ancestors who uprooted themselves and crossed the ocean to start a new life. And we love that myth. We love that myth. We don't think again about the reality. So my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, who left Galway, Ireland in 1848 because his wife had starved to death and so had his two children, and started a new life in Canada and then hopped the border illegally and went to Nebraska. Okay? And then that last sentence. Americans with this basic story in their past are still a majority of the citizenry, though just barely. That though just barely makes it seem as though it's that like appeal to change, like this is about to change in due course. Okay? So he starts this paragraph talking about patriotism and then immediately goes what some would describe as unpatriotic, to question the national myth that not everything was smiles and handshakes. Okay? On to the next paragraph. Nevertheless, it's hard to take seriously any poll showing that we all share a desire for change. Imagine that your phone rings and it's some guy from the Gallup organization or the Pew Research Center wanting to know whether you favor everything being fresh and new or everything staying exactly the way it is. Are you really going to admit that you're a stick in the mud who is more or less content with things the way they are? Not a rhetorical question. And this first line, nevertheless, it's hard to take seriously any poll showing that we all share a desire for change. Can't take it seriously? There isn't one person out there that has a genuine desire for change? Dare I say, that is a giant, hasty generalization. And then he gives us this anecdote Imagine that your phone rings and it's some guy from the Gallup organization or the Pew Research Center. Want to know whether you favor everything being fresh and new or everything staying exactly the same. Some guy. Okay, which again tells you what he thinks of polls. So it's that desire to, and it's just very negative. It's that negative aspect, that there's something wrong with polls, as though those don't mean anything. And maybe they do, maybe they don't, but he just eliminates it at all with that absolutes. And of course, then he says, are you really going to admit you're a stick in the mud who is more or less content with things the way they are? Yeah. What if I do say that? Isn't there probably one person who, when the Pew Center calls, says, I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. I wish I had a rabbit in the hat in the back of a 6'4" Impala. Just saying. One more paragraph and then we're going to leave this video for you to do the rest on your own. Change in the abstract is now a fundamental American value, like liberty or fried chicken. Everyone is for it in the abstract. Change in particular is a different story. Apart from a totally non-specific call for major change, Obama beat Romney in part by accusing him of wanting to change something specific, Medicare. So change in the abstract is now a fundamental American value, like liberty or fried chicken. So this whole thing, one big simile, and that change is like liberty or fried chicken. Fried chicken. That makes me take pause for a moment as I go, really? We're comparing change to fried chicken? I don't know. That seems a little bit of an odd appeal. I don't know if that's an appeal to white trashedness or within stereotypes that appeal to African Americans or an appeal to poverty or all of the above. I'm just not sure. It seems like a very odd language usage. I start to infer from this author that he takes a negative view of those people who view change in this way. Like it's not his view of change and therefore must be wrong. We have the further example here of a little juxtaposition, because liberty being placed next to fried chicken, two things we would not consider to be the same, and put together to elicit a response. That response, at least in my case, is a little bit of disgust with our author. I don't like how he's starting to manipulate the audience. Everyone is for it in the abstract. Again, that becomes to me just one big hasty generalization, saying as though we are not actually capable of understanding what's going on. Okay? And he really continues from there. At this point, I'm able to draw some conclusions. I'm able to see that his primary rhetorical devices, he has some various appeals to patriotism and some various appeals to history. He uses a couple of similes, and he also uses a fair number of rhetorical questions. So I can see that. I can see that his audience is rather specific, that his audience are those that are more educated, are better read, are more cultured, in quotes, and are probably democratic or liberal. I see numerous errors in logic, primarily hasty generalizations. I see that his sources are primarily anecdotes. And his purpose, if I look at my pink pack that I have, he, in very many ways, is analyzing and interpreting this idea of change, of course, through his context and lens. And if I finish up with tone, looking at my tone sheet, I can't help but feel there's some negative in there and a little show-offy. And that brings me, of course, to one of my favorite words, bombastic. I feel like he's a little bombastic. I feel like there's some pessimism in there. I feel like there's some negativity in there. I feel like there are all those various things. And so when I'm thinking about tone, that's where I'm going to go with it. And so that really will wrap up the first half of this article for Following a Columnist. And that's what I will bring with me on the various due dates, is just my annotated article. And I will be ready to go. Think about all these different things, and I've identified everything within our soapstone. Therefore, I rock. So if you have any questions, as always, shoot me an email. Hugs and kisses.